Hello? 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 Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us from the comfort of your homes. My name is Arla Gustafson, and I am the CEO of the Royal University Hospital Foundation. As we gather here today, we acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respects to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. Well, 2020 was a challenging year for so many, and I am sure all of you have your stories. But with the new year comes hope and opportunity. Many of you will know that we are very busy at the Royal University Hospital Foundation, having committed to raise $20 million for new surgical OR suites. We will be kicking off that campaign on January 28th and 29th, and we welcome all of you to tune in and certainly look at what we will be planning to do. Also, one of our other positives in 2020 and over the last 3 years is the growth and interest in women leading philanthropy. Tonight is intended to celebrate your involvement in this unique program and to also remind us, and all of us as women, that we can empower each other and achieve amazing things. I know, like myself, you wish we were all together and we would be able to celebrate those successes, and hopefully by June we will be. Speaking of amazing women, Women Leading Philanthropy is so fortunate to have two such women who have lent their names and their energy and their public support to our program. Please help me welcome our hosts for the evening, Women Leading Philanthropy Program Chair, Dr. Mary Kinloch, Division Head of Anatomic Pathology for the Saskatchewan Health Authority, joining us live on location, and WLP Honorary Chair, CEO and founder of Hilberg and Burke, Rachel Melke, joining us from Victoria.
Thank you so much, Arla, and good evening, ladies. It is such an honor to be with you. I wish that I could see you all in person, but I am definitely sending all of my energy from Victoria, and so excited to be joining you and the opportunities that connecting virtually allows all of us to really come together in a new and interesting way. I have been so honored to be a part of this incredible group of women who are truly bringing transformative change to healthcare in our province. And although from the outset I have been excited about this program, through my own personal journey with healthcare challenges over the last year, I have become truly even more inspired and passionate about the work that women are doing within Women Leading Philanthropy, and the work that all of you as donors are contributing to this program, and the true change that it is making for women in our province through incredible healthcare transformation. So, so pleased to be joining you here tonight. And also, I will now pass it over to the amazing Dr. Mary Kinloch, my co-chair for this evening.
Yeah, I miss you, Rachel. I wish that you were here with us too, but I'm sure that, you being in Victoria, you can still feel your commitment and your passion through virtually. I think tonight's going to be all about representation matters. And we're going to hear from our keynote speaker how that matters in medicine. And certainly we have a lot of donors that come from the medical field. But from whatever background that you're from, you're going to resonate with the message that we have from Dr. Barron. And then we're going to see through the exciting surprises that we have for you tonight that representation matters to research and changing research. So the fact that we have donors that now have chosen a path to fund that may not have been funded otherwise, is that your representation at this table matters. So with that tonight, I think you guys are in for an exciting, eventful night.
Of course, none of our accomplishments would be possible without the generous commitments from a number of sponsors, and we want to acknowledge our gratitude for their support. D&M Images, Encore, Handy Special Events, Hilberg and Burke, Humanly Branding and Marketing, and 1330 Creative Studios. And a huge thank you to our program sponsor, Sky Planning Group. For those of you who are unable to join us in September and hear the announcement at that time, we are so thrilled to share that Sky Planning Group is Women Leading Philanthropy's program sponsor. Thank you, Tracy, for your commitment to WLP and for advancing healthcare for women and their families at RUH. We are so, so grateful to you. When we heard from Tracy in September, she spoke about the importance of supporting research for healthcare, which is why she chose to support WLP as a program sponsor. And Sky Planning Group hopes that their commitment will serve to inspire other business owners and leaders in our community to donate and to spread the word about women leading philanthropy. For me, in my journey in business, being focused on purpose as a core tenet of our overall strategy in business has always been incredibly important. We certainly can do more together when we all get together and focus on an end goal. So thank you again, Tracy. You are truly an inspiration. In 2017, RUH Foundation believed in a vision of engaging women with a collective goal to inspire transformative advancement in healthcare. Today, here we are, celebrating the success of awarding our third $100,000 grant. We are so proud of this achievement, and we know you share the sense of pride. But there's more. Following our September's voting meeting at a WLP donor was so inspired by Dr. Barron's project, Physiologic Mechanics Underlying Ovarian Follicular Waves During the Menstrual Cycle, and what its outcomes would accomplish, that she called the foundation's office the next day and indicated that she felt so strongly about the importance that she would fully fund Dr. Barron's research herself. I am so thrilled to introduce you to Debbie Vidal and ask her to share with you what inspired her to make this transformative gift.
Good evening, everyone. Hi. My name is Debbie Vidal, and I've been asked to share my story. So like most of you, I sat down the evening of September 29th, connected to Zoom, to listen to the Women's Leading Philanthropy new application grant submissions. I try not to miss these presentations because every time I listen to these brilliant women speak, I learn something. And I'll be quite honest, I wasn't planning to give. When I heard Dr. Angela Barron's presentation, I realized that her work could be a reflection on my life. From severe menstrual cramps in university to standing on my deck in the middle of winter in my bathing suit, I could see that her research had the potential to make these life cycles better for all women. But what caught my attention and what touched my heart was the real difference that she had already made in Calgary's fertility clinic. Changing that process, allowing more possibilities and more hope, and that was huge for me. So at the end of the program, the grant had been awarded, and Rachel Milkey congratulated each of the presenters, and she turned to Angela and she said, "I hope there's a way to find you funding as well." And I thought, yeah, there is. It's going to be me. So I can help. I would absolutely love to fund the research that is not being done anywhere else. I've since had the pleasure to meet Angela. She's quite amazing. And to find out more about her research and learn how it all started. Who knew that what began as a study of ovarian follicular waves in horses, could transition to work being done here in Saskatchewan through the Women's Health Research Center and the Royal University Hospital, through the RUH Foundation, Arla, and Lisa Sands, who made everything happen, and through this platform of Women Leading Philanthropy, we started the process. We discussed how we needed to proceed. We nailed down the details, the commitment they needed from me, how the funds would flow, and the timeline that would make this dream a reality. It was so quick and it was so easy. I feel truly honored to help fund the research I feel can make a difference in the lives of so many women just like me. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Debbie. I mean, like, what else can you say with such a generous gift like that? But it goes back to what Rachel said about a central tenet of purpose and doing what gives you purpose. And I'll always reflect back onto that first time that Rachel told me that story about how she has her core values and uses those in her business, and based off that, then the Queen commissioned a brooch from her. And it was, I mean, it seems silly now to say it, that it was the first time that you kind of realize that when you look inside yourself and have your own core values, that people want to gravitate towards that. And I think that that's true for Dr. Bearwald as well too. Like, her passion came through, and it came through for somebody like yourself that it meant something to them. And that kind of matched up, and through the Women Leading Philanthropy of us having a team together to be able to fund 2 amazing projects, because if it wasn't for donors and Royal University Hospital, who always likes to be at the forefront of innovation, and having the amazing research that we have, that's kind of what triangulated all of this into this amazing opportunity. So thank you so much, and thank you for your inspiration for other donors as well too.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Last September, we were presented with 2 outstanding projects, both vying for the WLP grant. Tonight, we are pleased to have the winning project as selected by our WLP donors to share an update with us. Please welcome our 2020-2021 Women Leading Philanthropy Grant recipient, Dr. Laura Hopkins. Welcome, Dr. Hopkins. We're so glad to have you here this evening to share with Women Leading Philanthropy how our grant has empowered your project. There are new donors to our program since last September, so let's start by taking a brief moment to share what your project will accomplish, thanks to WLP donors.
Yeah, so we have, because of our virtual platform, we've been able to invite so many new people to come. So there's a lot of people who weren't here at your presentation for the September pitch meeting. So if you want to take a minute to summarize what the surgical technique.
Okay, one minute.
Yeah.
If you can't say it in 1 minute, it doesn't matter, right? Yeah. So this project that we're going to do for you and for all the women with gynecologic cancer is around enhancing recovery after surgery, ERAS for short. And essentially that's a program that will ensure and assure that every woman having surgery for gynecologic cancer at the RUH will have an uncomplicated, speedy, and dare I say, pleasant recovery from surgery. And we're going to do that by implementing a series of strategies and actions that have been defined by a worldwide society made up of surgeons and nurses, and it's evidence grounded and based. And there will be a complete, someone said the word transformation earlier, it will transform surgery for women through our actions preoperatively, intraoperatively, and postoperatively. And without getting into lots of details, I think that's a good overview of essentially what the project is. Very excited to be able to get that going this year. And it's kind of funny, I didn't realize the launch of the Mission Possible campaign was January 28th and 29th. As it happens, our first meeting for the ERAS program is January 29th, so it's kind of nice the way those two very complementary things are coming together, thanks to all the donors here.
Well, Dr. Hopkins, it's congratulations. It's obvious why your project struck a chord with these women. I know personally, I was just a few months out of having cancer surgery when you spoke about ERAS, and it was first of all a little bit surprising to hear that something like this wasn't already taking place. And I know you explained a little bit about what a few of these protocols were, and when I heard it, it was like, knowing that they're so simple, it was kind of like, why aren't we doing this? So can you touch on a little bit on what some of the protocols are?
Yeah, so there are 16 different actions that are in the guidelines for ERAS that were just released in 2019. And so recognizing that timeline, we will be the first to put that into place. And the reason why we're going to be able to do that is because of this structure that you have here. It's very, very rare in my experience, and I have quite a bit of experience. If you can see me, you can see the gray. And I have worked in a number of different hospitals in different provinces, and there is no organization like this that I know of anywhere that would support clinicians at point of care trying to initiate complex quality improvement, because that's what this is. This is complex quality improvement because there are many moving parts to it. There are things happening at different times. There are actions that are going to be delivered by different members of the team, multiple handoffs. It's not just one person at one point in time doing one thing. It's everyone working together, and it's with the patient's participation and engagement. So it really is using all of our energy and all of our strengths to make it perfect.
Why don't you give us an idea of like who else is on your team?
Yeah, and so that's exciting too, because since September, so the team was sort of, it was more than sort of put together. It was defined, but there were some things missing that couldn't be there without funding. Oh. And so I've been able to hire she's a nursing student, but she's going to work with me very closely to ensure that we divide our team into different working groups that will make all the different parts of the ERAS protocol come to life. And she was one of the first people I met when I started working in Saskatoon, so it's kind of interesting that we would have had that meeting a few years ago, and then many months later, and different paths came back together, and she shares a passion for women's health as well. Which is partly why she's pursuing her career in nursing. So I've been able to sort of lock her down. And then as well, just found out last week, and I'm sure you got one of these too, Mary, but we competed for a Dean's Award to have a medical student.
I got mine.
Yes, congratulations. Yeah, so, and we did too for the ERAS portion. So I was able to engage, there were 5 different young women doctors actually that applied for the Dean's Award to work with us on ERAS, and so I locked that one down earlier today, and she's very excited. Her name is Chelsea, and in addition, I went to the residency program research kind of meeting. Actually, Angela was there as well, and pitched the project to the residents in obstetrics and gynecology. And right after that, I got a interested call from another young woman with a passion for gynecology and oncology in particular. And so she expressed interest, and she's also going to be participating. And so I think you can start to see how the foundation is reaching beyond just clinical care at the RUH. It's already setting in place not just mentorship amongst women, but also, I hope, sponsorship, which is not as common as mentorship with women leaders and developing women leaders. So
And you're
I'm
even
very
going outside.
optimistic that really good things are going to come.
And you're going outside of gynecology as well, because you have anesthesia.
Yes, and internal medicine, and we have
medicine.
hematology and transfusion medicine, and then nursing leadership in the operating room and in the wound care specialist that I was working with on this project. She's going to help kind of liaise and do education with the ward nurses. And then we have our navigator role in gynecology who will help us when we first meet women that are going to undergo surgery with the team. So yeah, it is a very big group. And it's also nice in the pandemic when there are so many things that are keeping us apart that we have this to bring us together. So. Yeah. It feels very positive. I feel very supported, and I just want to say again, I have not seen a group like this anywhere. There's no foundation I know of that's operating in any hospital in Ontario. I've worked in Halifax as well, and most of the centers in Ontario I have operated. And I don't know of any foundation that is structured so uniquely to reach clinicians specifically intending to transform care.
And we've talked about patients being partners, which is very important and something that we'll touch on after Dr. Barron speaks, but how that enhances really your end goal, which is to make the patient experience better.
It does. It makes it possible, and we wouldn't be able to do it. I mean, if we could do this easily, we would do it. I mean, it would have been done already if it was easy. Yeah. Because everybody wants to do a good job in our line of work. Yeah. Of course, we want everything to be fantastic, the outcomes to be great and flawless, but if it were easy to implement all the 17 different actions within the ERAS protocol, well, everyone would be doing it, and no one is doing it.
Well, I have a question about that before I turn it back over to Rachel, is because I understand that these guidelines have been implemented in other disease sites.
They've been partially implemented in other disease sites, yes, as well. Yeah. Like it's some of the actions that are part of ERAS protocols are relatively simple and easy to do, and those ones are the ones that get snapped up. But it's the complex ones those ones that I mentioned that require handoffs from multiple points in care across a greater time period than just doing one thing at one time, like giving an antibiotic before surgery. That's just one person injecting a drug, done. But it's the more complex, like managing pain with multiple different kind of medications, some that you would start during the surgery and some that would then be continued after the surgery. The anesthesiologist would administer some of the drugs. The surgeon might inject some drugs in the incision site to prevent pain. Then the nurses are going to be assessing women and how much pain they have after surgery, and they will be using a variety of different medications to manage pain without using too much narcotic.
Well, could I ask then, if you were to see, so you've seen the ERAS guidelines be implemented partially in some disease sites, where would you see it being implemented in gynae cancer had RUH Foundation not have the Women Leading Philanthropy group not chosen to fund this project? Where, say, anywhere else in Canada, when would you expect to have these implemented?
Well, we were trying to do it in Ottawa before I left there, but we didn't do it because we weren't supported.
So like 2 years, 3 years?
So, I do think that the ERAS elements some of them will be put into place where there's a champion who is very interested in some aspects of it, whether it be before surgery, during, or after. There may be different types of doctors that are interested. It could be internists that might be interested in recovery phase after the OR. There might be a surgeon somewhere who's interested in something that happens during the surgery that they can do and that they feel empowered. But the kind of collective kind of working together of the whole team, that's not going to happen easily anywhere without actual support and without, importantly, without knowing how your outcomes are in your center, without having the data, without knowing, if you don't have a map, you can't get anywhere. I can't get to Regina without a map. Maybe some other people
easy.
can, but
You
I
just
definitely need a
get on
map.
that highway.
And,
it's like fall asleep.
and so, having that kind of navigation assistance, and that's a specialized skill too.
It is.
That physicians
don't
don't
teach
have.
you in
So you
residency.
do have to work with
Yeah.
different people with different skill sets, and that doesn't come only with intention, and that only comes, unfortunately, only with support and with funding.
Awesome. Thank you. Rachel?
Tell us a little bit about what you've been able to accomplish in September, and what do next steps look like?
Tell us your map.
Yes, well, I just covered it. I just.
Yeah. You got the team.
I got the team. I
But
got
remember,
the,
you're
the team is everything.
Remember, you're
so
not talking to all physicians here. So people that don't understand the background of what has to happen to motivate something like this.
yeah, so just getting the team together, getting the team to agree to meet. So we're going to meet monthly on the last Friday of the month. We're going to meet for 2 hours, and myself and my little assistant that we hired, she's going to be helping me along with probably the medical student, and the resident will have their parts of it. But we're going to kind of coordinate everything and make sure that we build order sets. So we're going to develop order sets, and we're also going to build something very different, actually, which is going to be very, very good, and that's going to be for the patients. And it's going to be it's not an information page, but it's going to be like a booklet that's going to define their care through surgery. And we're going to match like what to do before surgery, what to expect with your surgery, and what to expect with recovery. And we're going to match all of our ERAS elements are going to be the framework that we're going to develop our patient information, description of the journey, whatever, I haven't got a name for it yet. But we're going to create this as a resource for our patients. And it's going to be very contemporary, because it's going to be exactly hot off the presses. As we're doing it, we're going to build it. And then when we're finished, we're going to have this product that we will all be able to reflect on, use, and it's only going to exist because of this this organization and this foundation, and it's going to make the journey much more transparent for every patient and every provider.
Well, let me just ask Rachel, Rachel, how would you have liked to have something like that?
I mean, this is what was so compelling to me, was being really fresh out of having gynecological cancer surgery after our last meeting and hearing your pitch. It made me emotional. You touched on some things that were as simple as if the patient had antibacterial body wash, that they could wash their body, you would have reduced infection rates by a specific percentage. To me, it was like, wow, how quickly can we implement these things for patients?
Yeah.
You know, it's incredible and it's exciting. So maybe you can touch on any other specifics that we haven't already talked about of how would the journey look different for patients?
Well, yeah, I mean, the overall points.
I think it's going to be like that the patient won't notice. Is that
yeah,
the
it's
part?
still
Like,
going to
it's
be.
the
I mean, you're
absence
still
of
going
something.
to the patients that are going to have surgery. They're going to meet myself, Vicki Martin, Jen Brown. We're gonna do what we do. We're gonna do our consult. We're gonna explain everything. They're going to have a surgery, and the real difference, I think, for the patients that's going to be new is that the recovery is going to be uncomplicated, speedy, and pleasant.
So how are you
And
going to measure
it's-
that? So are you measuring it in days in the hospital, or
Yeah, length of stay is definitely one of them.
pain scores?
Pain scores is another one. Yes.
Tell us
Thanks.
a little bit about the IV iron bit.
The IV iron. All right. So
then you could also use measurement of like number of red blood cells or transfusion units.
So did you know that anemia and having a blood transfusion during surgery leads to prolonged length of stay, not just because you had to give a blood transfusion, but the anemia leads to decreased bowel motility, and it leads to nausea and vomiting after surgery. So if you can avoid the need for transfusion, and getting in front of that would be avoiding anemia by using an intravenous injection of iron before surgery, then you can enhance the recovery.
You're asking
there.
if I knew that pathologist.
Did you know that?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know that either, actually.
But
So
this
that's
is
why I
you
work
have
with other
this is why you
specialists.
have a multidisciplinary team.
So this is an element of ERAS to
Yeah.
identify and proactively and preventatively manage low hemoglobin before surgery.
Well, I
to
want
enhance recovery.
By the time, like next year, I want to see what was our current state beforehand, and then what you have done to make the patient course improved. I mean, it's just so we're gonna start it in gynae oncology, but this is gonna be a tsunami.
Yeah,
out.
so we're gonna lay the ground. We're gonna lay the groundwork over the next 9 months, and then we're gonna launch in September with the complete program, and then we will measure the differences.
And as provincial head, is this going out to the other centers for gynae?
Well, it will once we do proof of principle
Okay.
here. So we're going to do it first at the RUH. And
So I think that's an important point, as I know I have a small and mighty group joining in from Regina, is this isn't just an initiative that stays at RUH. The vision is that, once it's proven, we will filter it to other centers, which is super exciting for all of us in Saskatchewan.
yes, it
That's
is.
awesome. Well, I think that it's pretty clear what the impact of your project is going to be. And you've come into Saskatchewan as a new surgeon, new to us surgeon. And
Yes.
and I can't think of a better way to support you as well in coming here, growing your roots here, making you feel like you want to be in Saskatchewan. Like, that's important too. It's really important as somebody who recruits physicians. It's difficult to recruit physicians. It's difficult to recruit pathologists to Saskatchewan. And one of the major things is that you just allow people to have the autonomy and mastery over their craft. And by you having this, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but is this motivating to stay here?
I love it. I think that just to be allowed to embrace my strength,
Yes.
because that
Absolutely.
you're
speaking
is
the language here.
overpowering.
We don't have just physicians here with us. Like, we have lots of different women from other professional aspects, and I think that probably resonates, where it's like, as long as you're allowed to do what you are strong at,
Do what you love.
and do what you love, then that has so much satisfaction and
Yeah.
purpose.
Yes,
That's
thank you.
awesome.
Thank you,
That's
everyone.
great. Well, then that brings us to the next point, and I'm thrilled to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Leslie Barron. Dr. Barron is a general surgeon who has worked in both Canada and Australia. So in addition to being an accomplished breast surgeon, she also did a master's degree in molecular biology of breast cancer, and has even run in the most recent federal election, and has served on the board of the Ontario Medical Association. She has a strong interest and is an advocate for social justice, particularly in gender equity within medicine. And I have seen Dr. Barron speak. I follow Dr. Barron on Twitter. I love the discourse that comes out of the group of female physicians that's supported on Twitter. And tonight, she's going to join us this evening from Australia to speak about gender equity in Canadian medicine and a brief history of our lack of progress and why everyone should care. So I want to welcome Dr. Barron.
Oh, hello, everybody. Can everybody hear me? And is the volume okay?
Perfect.
Yes?
Yep.
Okay, I'm just going to And can you see that? Can everybody see my slides? Sorry, Rachel, if you're the only one I can see. If you could maybe just let me know if you could, you cannot see the slides?
Not yet.
Okay, here I go. And
Oh, there we go.
okay, great. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to speak on I keep saying when I speak, I have a love-hate relationship with this topic because I wish I didn't have to talk about it so much because I wish there were others. And the ranks are growing of gender equity advocates in Canadian medicine, but it's been a slow and extremely difficult journey. So the objectives of my talk are to outline the scope of the problem of gender bias in Canadian healthcare. Another key interest of mine is the gender pay gap in Canadian medicine. So I'm going to talk a bit about that. Talk about human resources or hiring issues and retention issues for women in Canadian medicine. Talk about the impact on patients, and talk about possible solutions. And I've left a little bit of time for questions. So my picture there, so we know that equality is not what we're going for here. So, you know, equality is everybody gets a shoe, and really we're aiming for equity, which is everybody gets a shoe that fits, okay? So we have to distinguish between those things. I have a few caveats. So the studies that I'm going to mention, and I could talk about this all day, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detailed data, but the data that we do have assumes a binary, not an inclusive approach. And so hopefully we will have the trans community and non-binary people better represented in the research going forward. We know that approaches to gender issues must be intersectional, as there are many types of bias. Intersectionality is a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, meaning that a woman who is, for example, Black or a person of color is going to have multiple intersecting axis of bias that she is going to have to deal with in her daily life. And it's extremely important because oppression is all interconnected, all kinds of oppression that we see, whether it's homophobia, ableism, racism, or sexism. And so it's extremely important that anything that we develop in approaching gender bias, the approach is intersectional. And I would like to say that the poor treatment of women in medicine in Canada simply is a mirror of what is happening more broadly in our society. If we look at the healthcare workforce, 75 to 80% of it is female, and most of those are not physicians. They are women like PSWs who are currently working in our long-term care homes. I do think it says something about power dynamics in Canada, though, that groups of thousands of Canadian female physicians cannot move the needle on gender bias in our own profession. It says something about the problems, deeply ingrained problems of patriarchy that we are up against. So in terms of gender bias in our medical practice, medicine to date really is quite a conservative profession. As you were saying with the ERAS protocols, it is extremely difficult to introduce change and progressive sorts of policies into medicine. We have extremely vertical hierarchical power structures within our institutions, our medical organizations, and our hospitals, and our leadership to date is dominated by white men. So healthcare is delivered by women and led by men in Canada and around the world. Gender bias in medicine adversely affects all patients, but particularly patients who are female. So it is really great to hear about how you are funding research into women's gynecologic cancers and the ERAS protocol. And I would like to say that I did try to launch an ERAS protocol at our hospital for bowel resection patients and was unsuccessful because of a lack of funding and infrastructure. So it's incredible to hear about the project that you're funding. Gender bias in medicine is an extreme spectrum. So we have things like sexual assault against female medical trainees happening in hospitals. But that is at one end of a spectrum. And at the other end of the spectrum, you know, you have things like the microaggressions that female physicians have to deal with every time they go into work. We have extreme referral bias in terms of what sort of cases are referred to female surgeons. We have increased rates of burnout in female physicians, and we have much harsher evaluations, particularly when female trainees get into the senior levels of training. The evaluations of them start to become more harsh, and we don't see our medical education institutions in Canada actively tackling these problems. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about where things are actually equal in Canadian medicine. So we know that female physicians have the same criteria when they're admitted to medical school. They pay the same tuition. They are subject, when they have positions, to the same clinical responsibilities and on-call frequency. We have to adhere to the same medical legal standards. We pay the same professional membership fees, conference fees, and our office expenses. Anytime the money is going out, it is equitable. So where are things inequitable? And I just want to add that this is not a complete list. So this is just a short list of examples where there's bias against women within the medical profession. The gender pay gap in Canadian medicine ranges from 30 up to 100%. If you hear a number lower than 30%, that is not accurate. The gender pay gap does not result from women being less experienced. It does not result from women working less hours. For example, that is a common misnomer. Simply because we have fee-for-service payments, it does not mean that there is not a gender pay gap in Canadian medicine, although all forms of payment models result in a gender pay gap. We have dropout rates from medicine. So unfortunately, when women finish training, often that is when they want to start having children. And so we've had this credential creep where there's been progressive levels and years of training added on to be able to secure a job, particularly within academic medicine. So we have we know within 6 years of completing training, up to 40% of women have either dropped out of medicine entirely or are working part-time. And that is an issue that everybody should care about. We have extremely unfair hiring practices. We do not have standardized hiring practices. We don't have standardized websites where jobs are advertised. We do not blind our CVs for gender, race, educational institution. And we don't track any of this data, of course, in Canada, and it's hard to fix what you're not measuring going forward in a prospective manner. We have a lack of support in the workplace. This can, from childcare, we have almost no hospitals in Canada that have daycares on site. We have very few hospitals that have breastfeeding, pumping, or feeding facilities. And we have very poor parental leave policies for physicians. We have a lack of advancement and leadership opportunities for women across the board in Canadian medicine, whether that's in the community or in academic centers. We have a lot of issues with Me Too STEM, which is basically sexual assault within science, technology, engineering, and medicine. At this point in Canada, people who report sexual assaults are far more likely to have adverse career consequences than those who are actually perpetuating them. We also have, amongst women, the burden of expectations on our shoulders from patients and colleagues that we are going to be there to listen and support. And with COVID, we have a lot of female physicians who are managing homeschooling while trying to work. So, you know, working as though you don't have children and parenting as though you don't have a job. So this is a Canadian Institute of Health, or CIHI report in 2018 came out looking at the state, the demographics of the Canadian physician workforce. So we have, 42% of physicians in Canada are now female. However, under age 40, women now account for over 54% of physicians, okay? CIHI unfortunately chose not to release any pay gap data. However, we do know that the gender pay gap is pervasive across StatsCan reports. There's a pay gap. There is no specialty where women physicians earn more than men, including the female-dominated ones like breast surgery, obstetrics and gynecology, and pediatrics. It doesn't matter how you get paid. If you receive a stipend, a salary, sessional or hourly, or fee for service, the pay gap will persist even when correcting for hours worked, seniority, and productivity. And then the last point is just, opinion is the weakest form of intellectual engagement, but that's followed very closely by anecdotes. So normally when I'm trying to engage on this topic, someone will immediately supply an anecdote for a woman they know who bills more than a lot of the men. But we need data on this. And of course, controlling what data you release and collect is a way of keeping the pay gap suppressed. We know that transparency helps, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. So this slide is courtesy of Boris Kralj, who's done a lot of work on the gender pay gap, mostly in Ontario. And sorry, it's very busy. However, it does show the yellow bars are 2016-17, purple 2006-7, and you can see that the gender pay gap has actually over that decade has actually gone up slightly. So within family practice from 32% to 33%, and in specialties from 40 to 41% pay gap between male and female specialists. And you can see on the right side there, the more male dominated a specialty is, the larger the pay gap within that specialty. So urology, you have very few female urologists, and the pay gap is the worst within that profession. So relativity is the gender, what I like to call the gender pay gap's sibling. And it's a medical political term that refers to inequities in pay between the specialties in medicine. And it is, at this point, according to research from the United States, at least 2/3 a gender problem. Women are guided into lower paying specialties that include psychiatry, pediatrics, neurology. And so most of relativity at this point is a gender issue. And so we really have to ask ourselves who benefits from the status quo here when we're not dealing with the gender pay gap, because we have a large amount of men in these specialties as well. So we have, the dialogue is really being controlled by an extremely small number of extremely high billing, mostly white male procedural specialists. So we, traditionally the medical associations in Canada have not done a great job dealing with relativity. But we must address it if the gender pay gap is to be closed. Also, if we want to see better access to mental health resources in the future, for example, because psychiatry is one of the most poorly paid professions. So it does have, not addressing relativity in the gender pay gap does have consequences for the population at large in terms of being able to access certain types of care. So a lot of people talk about the doctor shortage in Canada. We simply don't have enough doctors. Our per capita rate of physicians to population has actually been steadily rising for some decades now. But this quote is from Rebecca Rencast, both a family physician and a journalist. And we simply don't have a shortage of physicians in Canada. What we do have is a shortage of support for our female doctors. So if we could have every female doctor working, not being underemployed or unemployed, working at the top of their game, in a supported environment, we would not have a doctor shortage. So this is a typical argument for the wage gap, and in this comic, which I find very amusing, because when we talk about the wage gap between male psychiatrists and male urologists, for example, we don't talk about the choices that those physicians made to go into low billing specialties, but we do that with the gender pay gap all the time. So the choices argument for sort of explaining away the gender pay gap makes me very angry. So salary transparency, I spent a lot of time talking about different strategies to make things more equitable in Canadian healthcare with respect to gender. And I spent a lot of time saying the words necessary but not sufficient. So there's a whole bunch of strategies that we need, and all of them are necessary but not sufficient in and of themselves to level the playing field. So in 2019, after a long legal battle, the Toronto Star released the billings of the they released all the doctors' billings, including mine, but they released over some years 194 top billers, the top 100 per year, and only 9 of them were women. So we know that in other jurisdictions, including in university, academia, salary transparency has been helpful in Canada to lower the pay gap. It was closed by 30% by requiring salary transparency in post-secondary institutions. However, in Canada, there have been provinces, including BC and Nova Scotia, that have been releasing the fee-for-service billings of all their physicians for some years now, and it has not improved either relativity or the gender pay gap. So this is a book that I would highly recommend reading. She talks a lot about the US election, Trump versus Clinton, and what happened there. And it's written by a philosopher, actually. So she divides things into feminine and masculine coded goods. Feminine coded goods are things like affection and support. Masculine coded goods are things like wealth, prestige, leadership positions, those sort of things. So there is a norm that women should not compete for or deprive men of masculine coded goods that he wants. And when those norms, the norms of not competing against men for these goods, are violated, it's a common source of misogynist aggression. And unfortunately, that provides us for a pretty good explanation for why we see the devaluing of women, of the work that women physicians provide. And it's simply because we're expected to do this stuff for free anyway. We're expected to comfort and listen and care for those around us. And so, unfortunately, that's why we see women's work as physicians being devalued. So why should patients care? So we have a progressive devaluing of the care provided both to women and by women. So in my field of general surgery, breast cancer surgery is the poorest remunerated of all of the different subgroups of general surgery. There is a substantial and growing body of evidence that female physicians, including a very large Ontario and Quebec-based study of female surgeons, that female physicians provide equivalent and often objectively superior care. So when I say objectively superior, I don't mean just time spent talking to patients and listening. I'm talking about complication rates. I'm talking about death rates. And so patients should care when women physicians are being pushed out of the workforce or not supported. We have improvements in both morbidity and mortality when you're cared for by a female physician. You've detailed already, research funding into women's health issues tends to be underfunded, and clinical payments for women's health are often hugely undervalued. And I'll go into a couple of examples. So emergency room treatment, we know that when female heart attack patients present to an emergency room and are treated, they have better survival, mortality, when they are treated by a female physician. Very importantly, though, when they are treated in emergency room, female heart attack patients, by a male physician, the mortality difference decreases to almost equivalent when there are other female physicians working in that emergency department. So male physicians' performance improves simply by having female colleagues. And this is very, very important. We have surgical complications. So these studies that I'm mentioning are not sort of small studies. They include hundreds of thousands of cases. So the data really can't be questioned. There is a lady named Heather Sarsons who published a massive study on referral bias against female surgeons after a complication or death. So when referring physicians refer to a surgeon and there's a complication or a death and the surgeon is female, they stop referring. When the surgeon is male, they say, well, I guess it was just a sick patient, and the referral rates actually go up. So, you know, this is data that confirms referral bias against female surgeons. We also know that statistically that female physicians spend more time with patients, more time talking, more time answering questions, more time asking the handle on the door questions about what else might be going on that's affecting the patient's life. So more time spent with patients, when I talk to female surgeons, well, they say, well, you spend more time talking to patients because it's a choice. It's something that you choose to do, you like doing it. And this is another recommendation. There is a very similar book that's come out just in the last year as well by Gina Rippon. This is called Delusions of Gender. It's by a sociologist. She goes into detail. It's basically an antidote to the book Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, which was not scientifically based. There is no scientific evidence to date that women are inherently better at communication, empathy, etc. And this makes, you know, framing the time that we spend with patients as a choice very problematic, because most of that rests with patient expectations, our own expectations of ourselves, and it is all nurture and not nature. And it's also a bit insulting to male physicians to think that they can't communicate and be empathetic as well. So why should we care about this in Canada? So this is an example. I want to go back to what I talked about with female heart attack patients. So Salt Lake is a very large emergency room just outside of the GTA in Ontario. And they had an emergency room chief who hired no women in a very large emergency department for 16 years. Okay, so and there were other irregularities as well, and the consequences were effectively that he stepped down from his leadership position, but he's still working after 16 years of not hiring a single female physician. So if you're living in that area and you know what I know about being a female heart attack patient, that should concern you, that you've had an emergency room with no female physicians in it for 16 years, and essentially no consequences resulted from that either. So this is a quote from Nick Gordon, MD. Implicit bias in medicine hinders women's success, punishes them for having characteristics that are rewarded in men, and lauds men for being barely halfway decent human beings. So pretty harsh, I think you'll agree. I just want to tell you a little bit about Nick Gordon. Nick Gordon is an emergency room physician who is trans. He transitioned from someone who was looking after patients presenting as female to someone who was looking after patients presenting as male. And so this has offered an incredibly interesting insight into the difficulties that female physicians have in their work life. His reflections on treating patients as a woman and then treating patients as a man. And there's an excellent talk online from him about his experiences. And unfortunately, the insight is that female physicians going into work in settings like hospitals have a much more tricky time at work, dealing with nursing staff, dealing with other colleagues because of the bias that they experience. So bias in medical research and medical care is also a huge problem. So there's a book there, Sex Matters, that goes into the sex differences in research and how women are often excluded from being included in research studies. And offers some solutions for what we can do about it. And then the other is a op-ed by Dr. Sarah Temkin, a gynecologist from the United States, about the progressive devaluation of gynecologic care, which happens not just in Canada, but also in the United States. So in terms of Canadian-based examples, I'm assuming the same in Saskatchewan. I don't know the fee code schedule quite as well there, but just this past year, we had the Ontario Medical Association acknowledge that there is a pay gap, although they did some statistical glue to it and made most of it vanish. But they did negotiations with the government, and a particular type of breast surgery, which requires some extra training, oncoplastic surgery. It gives women better cosmetic outcomes after breast conserving surgery for cancer, so partial mastectomy. The set of codes that they had added were delisted in 2020. So we have our medical organizations saying that the gender pay gap is a problem and then actively making changes to the contract to make the pay gap worse and to devalue the care provided to women. Urology versus gynecology fee schedule is quite dramatic, the difference. I've done kidney transplants and I often assisted gynae surgeries at my previous hospital. Hysterectomy, taking out of the uterus, versus nephrectomy, taking out of the kidney, are roughly equivalent operations. But in the Ontario fee schedule, the nephrectomy, mostly done by male surgeons, is valued at twice that of a hysterectomy. We really have also a lack of an equity focus in our hospitals. Our hospitals are not community-facing organizations that are looking at the social issues or the social determinants of health around them in the community and addressing them. And unfortunately, that has led me to leave Canada to go and work in Alice Springs, where my job specifically will have an equity focus to it. So what can I do? Meaning you in the audience, you can get political, call your MP, MPP, ask what is being done about these things. Really, we need to all be voting, and we need to vote for parties who are putting policy forward to advance gender equity, things like universal daycare, breastfeeding facilities. For those of you who are in leadership, you need to put equity on your agenda. Really, every program that comes forward now should have equity as a focus. How are we going to measure it? And what are we going to do to hold ourselves accountable? If you can always vote with your membership in your wallet. If you're somebody that is here, you are obviously somebody who is willing to donate. And you can vote with your wallet and your membership in terms of holding your organizations accountable for having equity focus be at the top of their priority lists. And I'd just like to, I ran in the federal election. It was an incredible experience. And just to say to everybody out there, yes, it could be you. Please get involved in politics, run, volunteer, or donate. So more solutions. So we have, a lot of talk right now with interest in EDI issues, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So implicit drives training and EDI committees are really unclear if they actually move the needle on equity. Term limits is something that I like to talk about. We know that this improves diversity generally in leadership. So term limits, so not being able to hold a leadership position indefinitely is extremely helpful. We know that incumbency is a massive advantage. A woman often will not go up against an incumbent male for a leadership position. We need limiting the number of leadership positions that can be held simultaneously. We often see white men holding multiple positions simultaneously or leapfrogging from position to position. Quotas, people who have quotas love them, and people who don't have them seem to think that they are very evil. But we know that quotas are very helpful in terms of improving diversity at leadership tables. We definitely need, Canada needs to take a really good look at Australia's hiring policies in terms of equity for positions, particularly leadership. New policies must have an equity focus and manels and wanels. So manels are panels that are all men. Wanels are panels for discussion in any group where there are no people of color included. We need salary and billing transparency, and really for female physicians in Canada, the fee-for-service billing model that predominates in the private business model leaves female physicians extremely disadvantaged. These are some Canadian medicine equity advocates, and they really are everywhere in the country. So I just wanted to give a shout out. This is a very incomplete list, however. And I'd like to thank everyone for being here, and just leave you with a cartoon that really needs no explanation. I think I've come in just under my 20 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Happy to take questions.
Oh, perfect. Okay, we're going to have the questions rolling in. As they come in, Trisha's going to text them to me, and maybe I'll just give you, and like we're kind of bragging here with our Saskatchewan Medical Association that successfully through years of advocating did get relativity addressed with our most recent ratification with the Ministry of Health that did see the pay increase go equitably to the lower paying, more focused on the lower paying specialties. So that's like the idea that, okay, if you are at the top and you get a 1% pay increase, that 1% is going to go a lot further and compound throughout the years than if you're at the lower paying specialties and you get a 1% pay increase. You're just never going to catch up. So a big shout out to the Saskatchewan Medical Association, whose CEO is a woman, Bonnie Brossard, and who we just hired our 4th female president, Barb Konstantinovich, so they helped pass that through. So that was really prideful, and I do reflect on the experience of being a division head as a female. I was put into the role as pretty early on in my career by my boss, who's a pretty staunch feminist, which is awesome. And one of the first things that happened when I became division head was that Dr. Gillian Hawker came to speak from the Department of Medicine from the University of Toronto, and she talked about finding out those metrics and like, what are you doing to make sure that you're exhibiting unconscious bias in your search committee. So that was one of the first things that we did in the Department of Pathology is those unconscious bias and taking things down to what skills are we looking for and who are we looking for on our team, so pretty much that the charismatic male doesn't get hired. And then so just with the, like a first question, I guess, for Dr. Barron, is if I choose to run for public office, is my Twitter going to be a problem? Like, was it a problem for you? I'm just kidding. We're just waiting for questions to come in. But we do have like quite a large.
I mean, social media is a problem for women generally, right? You just tend to attract more trolls and more vitriol. And I actually ended up having a separate account for the federal election campaign, simply so that I could continue on with my regular account afterwards.
Yeah, I have to admit that I'm more of a watcher. Like, I do enjoy seeing the conversations that go on, but yeah, it's hard to want to take all of that on. Now, I think that it like goes without saying that we have like a lot of representation, certainly a lot of representation from our steering committee, which is comprised of women in business, their own consulting companies, law. We have students, and really all of them at our last steering committee, when we talked about the kind of things that you'd be talking about, is that they've all experienced it too. So it's obviously not just in medicine that we see it, which is, although it is why it's so important, because at some point every one of our donors has been a patient or they have been a family member of a patient. So all of that is personified within the medical community, every one of our donors is going to face at some point in our experience with the hospital. So
I think from the business women in the audience, you know, there are compelling, not only moral and ethical reasons to advance gender equity in any business organizations. There's also extremely good economic arguments. You know, businesses do better if they have more women on their board, and have more equity in their organizations, and that goes for hospitals as well. So it just makes good business sense, equity,
well, I think
as well as just being the right thing to do.
And like part of it is, I think probably, you know, you're preaching to the choir, but at the same time, not all of us have that solidified scientific background knowledge behind it. We all know it's a good idea, but like, and it feels right, but like, you know, you do want to have that evidence back behind it. So I do have a question here from Daleen Kells, that based on the research and its trajectory, when do you see the pay gap closing to within 10%?
So the pay gap in society, I'm not actually sure about, because we really haven't tackled that very well in Canada either. In medicine, unfortunately, we're actually actively putting contracts forward that are making the pay gap worse. So I really don't see it closing anytime soon. We had, for example, in Ontario, family physicians payment for thousands of family physicians, not all of them. A lot of them went to a capitated model, which was supposed to be more equitable. So instead of being paid per visit, the family doctors who have an ongoing relationship with you as a patient were paid per patient per year. And theoretically, that should have allowed closure of that 33% pay gap that you saw. So this is a good example of what happens when you introduce new payment models and new programs and you do not have an equity focus.
Okay.
So I honestly, the trajectory we're on now, the pay gap's actually just going to get worse, because our medical education organizations haven't done anything to, you know, get rid of the hidden curriculum that guides women into lower paying specialties. It's just getting worse and worse over time.
Well, what win would you see for women in medicine to make you feel like the needle is moving? Like, what's something objective that you're like, oh, there we go?
I hate to be, you know, so pessimistic, but honestly, we haven't even had statements about tackling gender equity that specifically mention sexism, misogyny, patriarchy from any of our medical institutions. We can't even get them to make statements, much less make policy changes. So we do have, though, now large groups of women communicating online through things like Facebook groups and sharing stories, and realizing that this isn't, a lot of the issues that they're having at work aren't a them problem, it's a system problem.
That's
you know, when you
true.
have all of these women who have to leave toxic workplaces. So that is very heartening. You know, I don't see a lot of really policy coming out that is going to close the gap. Even the women that we see in leadership quite often are not gender equity advocates. That's why they're put into leadership positions, because they're not talking about gender equity. So this idea that you can have a woman in a leadership position and then as an organization say you check that box and we're good because we had a female president is a very common myth that we see in Canadian medicine.
So I have a question here from Dr. Prokopchuk-Gok, who is she's a transfusion medicine physician, so she's part of my department, or our department, but I can say that she's a chef's kiss physician. She's amazing. But what is your response when you see or hear women publicly downgrade their skills? For example, by openly saying, I'm just a family physician, or I'm not sure this presentation is as good as the one by Dr. X, but let's get started.
Yeah, so I mean, imposter syndrome, we know that women experience much more imposter syndrome, and that is inevitable when you are constantly, from the time you pretty much start clinical engagement with patients. So this mirrors what happens in societies. Women tend to do better academically when they're in a very classroom setting. They get higher marks. And then as you move into the work world, women start to struggle and they make less money. So this happens in medicine. When you're in the classroom, women do really well. And then when they move into the work world on the wards as patients, they start getting all of these signals. They start getting questioned by the nurses. They start getting training evaluations that tell them they're too quiet, and then the next that they're too loud. And so you're getting all these conflicting signals. It's very difficult to maintain your confidence as a female clinician when you're getting all of these signals. And so I think we all have to, I would encourage women physicians to go back and look at the data. You are an excellent physician, is what the data says. When you actually look at it objectively in terms of mortality rates, complication rates. But unfortunately, if you go and look at Rate MD reviews, a lot of them for female physicians, if you'll look, someone should probably do a study on this, are quite harsh in terms of what they expect from their female physicians in terms of time spent to listen or having to get to the next patients. And it's not that women physicians shouldn't be taking the time with their patients. I just wish that it wasn't the big double standard. I wish male physicians were held to the same standard that women physicians are.
Yeah, that's a great point. I have one more question from Dr. Paige Grenier, who's a obstetrics gynecologist, new to practice in Saskatchewan, and just hoping that you can provide an example of how you have maybe directly addressed a male colleague who treats you with an unconscious or maybe conscious bias or misogyny in the workplace. Do you have any, I think she's looking for fallback phrases or responses to these situations, or maybe when a female colleague treats you differently than a male colleague, she's finding it hard to find the words just in the moment.
Yeah, so there's lots of online resources for that. When somebody, in terms of, if you look up dealing with microaggressions, so sometimes you can say things like, I didn't just hear you say blank, and then repeat the phrase that they said. You can say, oh, what did you mean by that? Yeah. Sometimes you can deflect with humor. And increasingly, as I get older, more confident in my clinical skills and abilities, I just call it out for what it is. I just say, you know what, that's bias. You treated Dr. X, male surgeon, this way yesterday, and now you're treating me, female surgeon, differently today. And that's a gender issue for you. And I think until we start doing that education one-on-one, not that all of the education around gender bias should fall on the shoulders of women. It absolutely should not. Men should be going out, just as I, as a white person, have to go out and do my own education around racism, Black Lives Matter. The onus shouldn't fall on the group being oppressed to educate and correct the biases and injustices. It's an everybody problem. And again, there's good political, economic evidence that improving equity improves things for everyone. We know that high workforce participation rates for women, as they have in Quebec with universal daycare, benefit everybody through more taxation. So, you know, there's all of these things, and yet we still see very little movement. And the COVID pandemic has simply amplified all of that.
Totally. that's a good place to end it. And thank you so much for taking our questions. To really have a personalized interview with you is like, everybody was very excited to have you come, and so we really especially thank you for taking the time all the way from Australia as well, and we hope to check in with you at some point, whether that's over Twitter or virtually some other way, to see how you're settling in Australia and see how things go, and maybe you can teach us some things that they're doing there that we need to implement in Canada.
Yeah, I'm planning on bringing gender equity in medicine to Australia.
All right.
In a big way.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I'll echo those.
Me.
Thank you so much. I'll echo those sentiments. We appreciate your insights, even though if any of you feel like me, it makes you a little bit furious to see this stuff. Being someone who's truly passionate about gender equity, and specifically gender equity in women in business and women in leadership roles and boards, hearing the specific data about how far we have to go is really hard to hear, and it's challenging, but I appreciate that you really brought forward some ideas, some solutions. And one thing I really loved hearing you say was, we need more women in politics. I'm very passionate about that, and any of us are qualified to do it. So I think that's a solid message that we can all carry away. So thank you so much, Dr. Barron. And now,
thanks for having me.
Take care. Switching gears slightly, we are, Hillberg & Berk is proud to sponsor tonight's event, and we have a door prize for one of our fabulous WLP donors. At Hillberg & Berk, we really care about how does our impact in the community really translate to supporting and empowering women. And so with that, we have a winner of one of our pieces from our Sparkle collection, and that winner is Narissa Tyson. So congratulations. Someone from the foundation will contact you shortly, and I hope that this gift adds just a little bit more sparkle to your life.
I can help you get in touch with Narissa. She's one of my frequent givers of pathology, so that's great. She's an obstetrics and gynecologist in the city. So I think to close out the evening, I don't think that Rachel was alone in probably having that fire, regardless if you're one of our donors from medicine or if you're in the professional community outside of medicine. But to those that are watching that are physicians or healthcare, allied healthcare members, you probably have an idea in you that is worthy of applying for this grant when it becomes available again in September for our pitch party. So it's time to be thinking about it now, and when the grant goes live, probably in May, then you'll need to apply to us, because we want to hear your ways that are going to transform healthcare for patients at RUH. And if you are one of our donors outside of medicine, then you probably have a friend that you want to take to the next WLP member, crossing our fingers that it's in person. And the June party is going to be all about information about the WLP donor circuit. So June, we give a lot of information about what this grant is about, who it supports, and why we started it. And then in September is when we have our pitch party and voting party, so that you can come and you get to choose where your money goes to fund which project. And that's the accountability that Women Leading Philanthropy provides. So if I'm going to leave you with that tonight, it's that I want you to put in your ideas, because you all have a burning good idea inside of you, and I want you to bring another friend to come meet us in June.
Thank you so much, Mary. I love your passion for encouraging women to bring forward projects. Maybe I'll just encourage anybody who is on this call who is a WLP member, or maybe you're on the call and you're not a member and you're thinking about it. I hope that tonight has convinced you to participate in this absolutely incredible program. Not only are the two projects that are happening this year part of the incredible transformation that's happening in healthcare because of WLP, but there have been two other projects that have been funded, and we hope to just continue making this bigger, to get more members, to raise more money, and to continue to do incredible things that if this hasn't already impacted someone in your life or you personally, you know, unfortunately, the statistics are that it probably will in the future have some sort of an impact in your close circle of friends or family. So this is one way to take control of the healthcare that we get in Saskatchewan. And so I hope that you will consider signing up if you haven't already. If you already are a WLP member, thank you. I hope that you will bring a friend to our next meeting. And I can't wait to hear the next round of pitches and the impacts that those will have for women in the province.
Yeah, for sure. So tonight I'm leaving with a deep sense of pride about the WLP program and the personal contributions made by all of our donors to transform healthcare for their families. And we really have already accomplished so much in 3 years, and we hope to see you in June to tell you more about that.
Well, I have to say, Mary, it's been an incredible evening. Even though I've been joining all of you virtually, I feel a sense of definitely fire in my belly for work that we need to continue to do and fight for, and as well as truly inspired by the amazing work that is being done by incredible female physicians across our province and across the world, truly. So thanks to everyone who has joined us in this journey. Thank you for those of you who were part of presenting this evening, and we can't wait to see you all in June.
You bet. Love you, Rachel. Miss you.
Love you, Mary.
Okay.
Miss you too.
Okay, bye.
Bye,
Good night.
everyone. Good night.